So, I'm here with, what's your name, sir?
Julian.
Julian, I'm Dylan, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
So I have a really heavily planted 40-gallon tank.
Okay.
I continually struggle, even after dosing straight up nitrogen and straight up, like I do Flourish for fertilizer, and then I do Flourish like straight up nitrogen.
Yep.
I really struggle to get nitrates in my tank because of how many plants I have.
Okay.
It's not necessarily hurting my plant growth, but
It's the bottleneck.
I would like more. So that's why I'm adding some fish. But do you have any advice on certain fertilizers, root tabs, all of that?
So, just like human medicine, right? There's brands,
right?
But then there's the actual chemical. So
Yeah,
like ibuprofen, right? You could find that in 10 brands, basically. So,
Yeah.
the way that we do this is that every aquarium, whether it's a coral tank or a plant tank with photosynthesis, there's going to be a bottleneck.
Okay.
So the bottleneck could be things like it could be not enough lighting. You know, you have the guy with like sort of the low end light. His plants are going to grow their way. It could be carbon, like carbon dioxide, right?
Yeah.
It could be phosphorus.
Okay.
Nitrogen,
Yeah.
metal like iron.
Yeah.
So we like, in this store, we like to make the bottleneck phosphate.
Okay.
Because phosphate is the thing, so usually your better plants feed from a heavier nitrogen recipe, and then your like algae, like your hair algae, cyanobacteria, they more like phosphorus, right? So I want my system to be capped on phosphorus.
Okay.
Right? Does that kind of make sense?
Yes,
this is a little bit more
No,
of a technical way
I
to
totally
do this,
hear you.
right? So this is how we run it. So first is like, what is your target? Then we can talk about how to get there, right? So we have plant tank or reef tank, but if you have algae problems, we're going to have one recipe that we're making. So you're like the cook, right? You could make tortillas, you could make, bread. It's the same elements. It's just like how. And there's a thing called the Redford ratio, which is what this, if you want to look that up.
The Redford ratio.
That's like the technical way to do
I'll
this,
look
right?
into it. Thank you.
So if I don't have algae, right, they have one kind of chemistry, because I want everything to grow really, really fast.
Right.
And then if I start getting algae, I'm like, oh, let's like break this thing, right?
Dial it back.
So we're aiming for a carbon hardness of 2.
Yeah.
Phosphates, we're trying to keep this between 0.10 and 0, depending on whether we want to have a turbo.
Yeah.
So like maybe in this tank it's new, I want to grow everything really, really fast. I don't have algae.
Yeah.
Let the phosphates be up.
Sure.
And if the algae starts coming, right? And then I keep my nitrogen always at 10, which is probably what you're struggling with. And then the iron, you have free and chelated iron, but let's say like maybe as a general thing, keep the iron at like 0.25.
Yeah.
Okay. So then oftentimes when one of these keeps hitting 0, it means that the other ones are at an abundance.
Yeah.
Right? So as an example, like if you were to strip all the phosphate out of your tank, like completely 100%, that will stop all growth.
All growth.
Right? Nothing can happen. Like no tree can grow, no algae can grow, no plant can grow. Nothing can grow if you take all the phosphate away.
Sure.
Or iron or whatever, right? But like let's say you removed all the phosphate.
Yeah.
Then every time you feed the fish food is going to supply nitrogen, and then the nitrogen is going to go up, right? And the nitrogen would just go up to 100 if you wanted it to, right? So right now it sounds like you're using nitrogen as your bottleneck.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Which is maybe by accident, but that's
I
what's
actually
happening.
I've tested for KH, I've never tested for phosphate once.
Yeah, so those 4 are your main 4.
Yeah.
There's a million other things you can check for,
Yeah.
but these 4 are kind of like, that's as simplified as you can make the chemistry.
Yeah.
You can add potassium into it. There's a million other things we can add to this, but those 4 are the one where I think, like on my home tank, I do this like every 2 months.
Yeah.
I just get like a vague reading. So for instance, like if you're using the normal Flourish, right?
Yeah.
If you look at this, like the number 1 ingredient is nitrogen,
Yeah.
but then right down after that is phosphorus,
Yeah.
right? So if you're trying to make your nitrogen go up, but you're adding a bunch of phosphorus with one of the fertilizers, it's going to fight you.
Yeah, okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does make sense.
So you might want to, usually advanced people, you go away from the all-in-one fertilizer.
Yeah.
You kind of put that to the side. And then you build that fertilizer with your various things. So
Very
like
cool.
Seachem will sell you iron and trace elements.
Yeah.
They'll sell you nitrogen. They'll sell you
Yeah.
potassium, right? And then you kind of figure out which one is like kind of high right now. Like, oh man, my phosphates are real high, right? So like, don't add that one.
Yeah.
And in this way, right, you're
Very
going to
cool.
kind of...
Okay.
The other thing you can do is, so we try to set our lighting parameters to nitrogen.
Okay.
So if my nitrates were below 10, I would lower the amount of lighting.
Okay.
If my nitrates were above 10, I would raise the amount of lighting.
So why?
So let's say all your fertilizers are good.
Yeah.
Like you're kind of doing a good job, whether by accident or like technically or whatever. You have like your plants all look healthy. You don't have a lot of algae, right?
Yeah, no algae at all.
Yeah, you're growing kind of good.
Yeah.
Okay. So what is our gas pedal, right? Like what's determining, is the car going 10 miles an hour or 100? That's the light. The
That's
light
the
is
light.
that's why you bought that I'm sure you bought a real nice light.
I have the Fluval 3.0.
Okay, so you bought like a $200 light,
Yeah.
right? Or whatever it is, right? So should we use that 100% 14 hours a day? Should we use that 50% 8 hours a day?
I run 75 8 hours a day. That's found me.
Okay, so you're running that light at about 50% of what the plants can eat it at.
Yeah.
The ATP cycle can go 14 hours.
Yeah.
So you could in theory raise it or lower it, right?
Sure.
Why not run it 50%? Like how are we picking that?
So when when I was running bright light for like 10 hours,
Yep.
that was when I was having my algae. So I did some research, I dialed it back. And once I dialed it back, the algae just kind of
Right, so imagine in this scenario you're using the light as your bottleneck,
Yeah.
right? If you want to be more technical, pick like an element.
Okay.
So what will happen eventually, like let's say over like 3 years if you
Yeah.
do this, right? If you're growing algae, it means you have more phosphate than nitrate over like a long period of time.
Yeah.
Like it might take 2 years, right?
Yeah.
But that imbalance is like slowly building. It's like you're gaining 1 pound a month.
Right.
So like initially
Slow.
you don't kind of look like anything's happening, but in like 3
eventually it'll
years,
catch
right.
up to you.
So if you raise the lighting and algae comes, yeah, of course, if you turn the light off, the algae will die.
Yeah.
So take the extremes, right? No light,
Yeah.
algae's not going to grow.
Right.
Right. But that's not really like a good long-term solution.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
So
right.
if I were to raise it right now, you think I should raise it 108 hours, or do you think I should do 75?
Well, so you said your nitrates keep going to 0.
0.
So for me, I wouldn't raise my lighting yet.
Okay.
Now, if I was to test this aquarium and my nitrates were at 40,
Yeah.
I would say, oh man, I'm not growing fast enough. Let me up my lighting.
Sure.
Right, so right now your nitrates keep hitting 0, so
Yeah.
don't raise the lighting. I mean, in a weird way, we'd almost argue to like lower the lighting,
Okay.
right? But before I did any of that, I would just analyze my recipe, right? So if your phosphates, like let's say we want the phosphates to be at 0.05, like in the middle of
Right.
this, because you maybe have algae, maybe you don't, depending on what happens, right? So we go like in the middle.
Yeah.
So like you're at 0.05 on phosphates, but you have no iron,
Right.
right? Or you have no nitrogen.
I do supplement iron.
Would you test it?
I do not test it.
Right, so like, you don't have to test it every day, but
Right,
like
right.
once every month or two, get a reading so you could steer.
Do you guys sell me a? Could you sell me a?
We could sell you a test kit, or
Yeah,
you can
that'd
bring
be
the
great.
water and we can
That'd be
test
great.
it for you.
No.
Yeah, yeah.
No,
I can show you how to do that.
I'd buy it right now. You've
Yeah,
been super helpful.
come and I'll show you.
Yeah.
Do you have like a basic like freshwater test kit kind of thing
Yes.
at home?
Yeah, I
Like-
have the API, the one with the little dripper.
Okay, so you probably do you have like the master test kit?
Yeah.
You probably have nitrate in there.
Nitrate,
So
ammonia.
so the way that I like to do this, so I want to be able to test these 4 items to be able
Yeah.
to steer. Like I need a transmission fluid, I need engine oil, I need
Right.
like the car. 99% of the time you never look at the transmission thing, but if you saw that gauge was like,
like really redlining. Yeah.
I'm not telling you to go do anything about it, but just like look at it every once
Yeah,
in a while.
look at
right?
it.
So, do we have the ability to check those? Do you have a saltwater tank or
No, freshwater.
Okay, so did you say like you've done a saltwater before or something?
No,
Okay,
no.
because that's a saltwater test.
Yeah.
Is the only reason. So, do you not have those 3 test kits?
So I don't.
Go ahead. You have
Don't-
this one because that's in the main
Yeah.
master
Don't
kit.
check iron. Don't check phosphate, and I don't check KH.
Okay, so do you just do tap water in your tank, or do you do like RO? or-
No RO. I do tap water and then just throw on my conditioner.
Okay.
Make sure it's up to
Okay.
temp first.
So carbonate hardness at a like do you put CO2 into the water?
Yes, I do. I inject CO2.
Okay, so carbon dioxide. There's 3 things going on with carbon dioxide. There's carbon dioxide. There's carbonic acid.
Okay.
And then there's KH, so hardness.
Right.
So what happens is, the higher the hardness is, when you pump in CO2, like let's say your KH is 10 instead of 2,
Yeah.
like 80% of the carbon dioxide is going to turn into carbonic acid.
Okay.
So you're like wasting some of the CO2.
Yeah, yeah,
Does that
yeah.
make sense? On the other hand, if your KH goes to 0, all the carbon dioxide will be carbon dioxide. Ryan, are you working? I can work, yeah. Okay, put Tommy down and help the customer, make sure the customer's being, right? So we want to make sure that if you let the KH go to 0, then all the carbon dioxide will be fully available to the plants.
Yeah.
But your bacteria will all die.
Yeah.
Right, so that's bad.
Yeah.
So we have to kind of find like a place where we have enough carbon hardness for the good bacteria.
Yeah.
But we don't have all this extra where it's blocking the CO2. Right, so you can get the most effective CO2 if you
Yeah.
kind of find the middle ground.
Yeah.
All these things are like find the middle ground, basically.
Yeah.
So a lot of times, like when you do something and you see, oh my god, I got algae or something, it's what's happened is one of your elements is like off,
Okay.
and when you push it, like imagine your shrimps or whatever can eat like 10 algae per week.
Right.
And so at 8 hours, you're growing 10. At
Okay.
10 hours, you're growing 20, right? So,
Yeah.
like, we should just stop the algae from growing.
Sure.
And then it won't matter how much light you put.
So my issue right now is I don't know where my bottleneck is. Like that's
Right.
that's my issue.
The fact that your nitrates keep hitting 0, to me, tells me that nitrate is your bottleneck. Because
Right.
every time it hits 0, that means, like, something stops.
yeah.
Right? And it's not to say your plants aren't growing, but, like, you could make them grow more perfectly. Or
Yeah.
whatever, right? It's
Yeah,
just-
that's
you know.
because like my reds recently started coming out, so I think
Yeah.
my iron is pretty.
So that means you
decent.
probably did the trace
Yeah.
elements well,
The,
right? Right?
And I'm not really having any. I haven't ever really had problems with algae. Like
Yep.
so, I think like
Check the iron. I mean, it could, I don't know that it's phosphorus or whatever it
Yeah.
is, but one of these guys is missing.
so. Would you,
know,
be able
check
to today give me a more comprehensive test kit?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, then there's like different brands, of course, which is cost and all this stuff. But let me show you kind of what I would do.
Yeah.
Or what we do here. So this is, so you already have the nitrate.
Yeah.
This is the way we do it. I can kind of show you this mixture. So phosphate is the one, so most of the other ones we're measuring in parts per million.
Sure.
Phosphates we're measuring in parts per billion.
Okay.
So that test kit tends to be a little more fancy.
Yeah.
Because it's like a reef test kit.
Yeah.
So with that one, you have two options. Like obviously in the store we have all these things, right? So we're using this like super fancy one where you get like 0.07.
Yeah.
That is amazing if you can swing that one, and I think it's worth it in the really long run.
Yeah.
But from like an accuracy perspective, this German test kit is a Salifer test kit.
Yeah.
It's a liquid test kit like the API ones, but it's more refined.
Okay.
So this one can give you a relatively good understanding. The API test kit is like doesn't help us.
Yeah.
Right. So you have to pick one of the two of these. Obviously, $20 or $7.
I think I'll probably go with the $20 one.
Totally fine.
I'm not
At
rolling
home,
though
I
right
use
now.
this
Yeah.
one. At the shop, I use that one.
Cool.
So
Very
totally
cool.
reasonable,
Very
right?
cool.
Okay, it's good enough to get us like kind of going.
Get
with
in the
this.
general direction.
Sometimes in really like exotic aquariums, you need to know the difference between like 0.04 and 0.07,
Yeah.
and that's where like this comes in.
Yeah.
For what we're talking about.
Yeah.
This is fine. And then iron. This gives us two types of iron. This gives us free iron and chelated iron. There's two different styles. of
Chelated iron.
Yeah,
I've
so
heard
the-
of free iron. Chelated
Yeah,
iron.
so the liquid that you're adding from Seachem as an example,
Sure.
or usually any of your brands, right, is going to be the free iron.
Okay.
So this is like eating a Twinkie.
Yeah.
Super tasty to the plant, right? It makes it grow really, really fast. The danger is it's really active, so it can like kill invertebrates.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So
Yeah.
we
yeah.
have to limit how much we put in.
I've been very because I
You have to
also
be
run.
real tight.
I run
Yep.
Neocardina
Yep.
shrimp in my
They're
tank.
real sensitive to
So
it, right?
I'm doing like drops,
Yeah.
and my red.
You said you were going to get some fish to add
Yeah,
nitrates.
fish add nitrates, and also just like fill in my tank a little more. I
Yeah.
have a lot of fish already, but it's just such a densely planted 40 gal.
So to give you an example,
Yeah.
100 years ago, probably when you were 5 years old, right? So maybe 15 years ago, I had a 90-gallon tank, and I made this like custom lighting thing, so crazy, like really intense lighting. Back in
Yeah.
the day, we used like fluorescence and stuff.
Yeah.
I had like at like the beginnings of LEDs, they didn't even have like brands, right?
Yeah.
And then I put like reflectors on, so the thing was like insanely bright, so really strong light, probably like a couple times stronger than lighting
Sure.
per gallon that you have right now.
Sure.
In that 90, I had 17 adult discus,
What?
250 cardinal tetras, 100 rummy nose, like maybe 80 sunset variatus platies, and like an assortment of little small
In a
fish.
90?
In a 90. And the nitrates would hit 0 like every week.
In a 90 is crazy. That's
Right?
crazy.
Plants, like nature is insane. Like if you ever
Yeah.
look at like the reef thing,
Yeah.
like nature can do all this for
Yeah,
you.
100%.
The issue is most people, they kind of like blind dose. And so like your tank could have 10 times the fish that you have right now, but you're not feeding something. And so it kind of like slows everything down. So I always use the analogy of like a desert versus a rainforest.
Yeah.
Go out to Death Valley, like the sun is super bright.
Yeah.
There's like one plant every 500 feet.
Yeah.
Go to Ecuador and like the trees are 250 feet tall. If there's not a limit, like nature will just go crazy.
Yeah.
What happens is something is missing and then it kind of stagnates.
Yeah.
So you can just kind of keep going as long as you make sure you fill in the
Yeah.
missing components. So
Some-
go ahead.
I'm checking these three.
Yeah. So you're checking these three. So this one is kind of from your tap water.
Yeah.
Right? You can use like RO water to cut it. So like
So that I have a lot of questions on RO water.
Go ahead.
So I've been reading. So I want
Whatever
to.
you
I have a little I have an idea for this little vase tank that I want to do with
Yeah.
just Cardina shrimp in them.
Sure.
I mean, I know compared like Neocardina are pretty hardy, but
More
Cardina
strong.
shrimp,
Yeah.
Cardina
Yeah.
shrimp are like they like RO water. You don't need it,
Yeah.
but
What they don't, so what happens with these shrimps is they'll adjust to almost anything, but they have a sensitivity in like the speed at which you change the chemistry.
Right.
So what osmotic shock is what we call that, right? So remember when you buy them, it's super delicate, right?
Yeah.
Especially like for us, right? Because
Yeah.
we're doing it, and then you have to do it. And then when you do like a water change, so if you're just using tap water, right? Realize like the tap water, the hardness is changing every single time you take the
Yeah.
water. So one time it's 3, one time it's 8, one time it's 4, especially in like a desert area.
Sure.
Or like when it's raining, sometimes you get real soft water. Sometimes you probably notice sometimes your plants do better and sometimes they do worse.
Yeah.
Like a lot of this is the tap water.
Yeah.
Right. So what'll happen is like people will have the shrimp, they're doing really, really good, and they'll do a water change and they'll die.
yeah,
And so what's happened is that your source, like that water change is like a fertilizer. And you don't really know what's happening, and then all of a sudden
so
some
luckily
chaos happens, right?
Luckily, I've never I haven't had to do
Yeah.
water change in like 8 months.
good, yeah.
Everything's running like really, really smooth in my tank.
Well, and then, so here's another thing that can happen. It's all by chance, right?
Yeah.
So right now we've been very rainy, so
Yeah.
the water's pretty soft. But let's say it was a more drier, like 2 years ago, so it's
Yeah.
more drier time. You keep topping off with the tap water, and the tap water is relatively hard. And that hardness doesn't like evaporate, right? So over the course of a year, it's sort of building up.
It's like you were talking about earlier.
Same idea, right? So, and like right now it's raining a lot, probably in LA, that's not going to be a problem, but maybe next month it could
Who
be,
knows?
right?
Way
So,
drier.
again, this isn't something you have to check every day. Check it
Yeah.
once a month or once every 2 months, and then if you see it starting to get hard, like make an adjustment.
Yeah.
Right?
And how would you make an adjustment?
So two main ways,
Yeah.
right? So Seachem is very good for this stuff. They make a product called Acid Buffer,
Okay.
which turns carbonate hardness into CO2.
Okay.
Okay, so
Yeah.
that's wonderful.
That's
for
very-
us.
yeah, very
Gotta be
simple, yeah.
very slow with using it, but it can do this over like a week. You can just soften it that way. Or the way that we do as a store, because we have RO water, is we'll just cut it. So we'll add water that's RO water instead of tap water.
So you do RO water, and then for like shrimp, you just supplement with like a little bit of salt or whatever.
Well, so like I'm measuring the like my tank, right? And I want my hardness to be X. If the hardness is above X, I just do RO water, which is like pure. There's no hardness in it. Once the hardness gets too low, then I would add things.
Yeah.
So a lot of the supplements, if you're using all RO water, you have to do those supplements.
Yeah.
If you have LA tap water, a lot of times your hardness is already high enough where you don't
Yeah.
really need as many of those things, right? So right, and then there's another thing called general hardness you can get into, right?
Yeah.
So the trick here is you don't want to be too hard and you don't want to be too soft. You want to kind of be in like the middle
Yeah.
for all these organisms, right? And that'll promote breeding and all
Yeah,
this kind of
very
stuff.
cool.
And watch behind you, makes the plants kind of do better, right? So like the fish want something, the invertebrate wants something, the plants want something. If you can find kind of a middle ground.
Yeah.
So maybe like, okay, I care more about the shrimps than the plants. Maybe I'll go to a carbon hardness of 3,
Okay.
right? Like I'll pick a number that's a bit higher.
Yeah.
Or if I did a Tanganyikan cichlid with plant tank thing once before.
Yeah.
So they like really hard water. So I did like Anubias, right? I picked plants that are more for hard water.
Yeah.
You get real fancy with
Yeah,
this,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
But point is basically like pick the number and then
Adjust accordingly.
like steer to that number.
Yeah. Cool.
Every once in a while, you don't have to do it all the time, right?
Yeah.
But I do this like, I have a big 500-gallon tank in my house, right?
No
I steer
way.
it like once every 2 months.
Hold on. You have a 500-gallon
Yep.
tank. Is it like a planted freshwater tank?
It's a Central South American like small cichlid, like under 5 inches with plants, right?
Dude, I'm gonna have to invite myself over to your house, bro. That's insane. What was your name one more time?
Julian.
Julian, I'm Dylan. Dude, thank you for everything.
No
You
worries,
are
man.
a wealth of knowledge.
No-
I
no
really,
problem.
really appreciate you.
Yeah.
And thank you, Stephen, for filming.